Happy to join with you and teach for the next 2 weeks here. Pastor Sam and I will be trading off for at least the next couple weeks or couple months as Pastor Fink continues his care. So I think I got the laydown that we're somewhere in Romans, and that's about as specific as we got. But that's okay. Starting chapter 4. Okay. Cool. So we'll probably end up bouncing between 3 and 4 in order to make sense of it all. I do have the handouts for number 7 and number 8 on the stand there. Number 7 corresponds with the end of chapter 3, and number 8 corresponds with the start of chapter 4.
You know what happened to 6? Next thing we have is 5. We jumped to 7.
I can get copies of 6 to you, but that would have been earlier in the 3. We end up covering the same amount of stuff. We just don't always walk through it the same exact way as the papers do. So I've got I've got 10:04 right now. So we'll start with a word of prayer. The clipboard should be working their way around, and we'll pray through those petitions at the end of our time together. So let's pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for another week to rejoice in your blessings. Especially this week, we're thankful for the celebrations of our country and the ways that you take care of us. We ask that you continue to bless us through Trinity and through our other ways that we connect with people in our lives, so that we might see that you are the giver of every good gift. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so coming out of chapter 3 into chapter 4 of Romans, there are 2 spots in the New Testament that we really love Abraham, and Romans 4 is one of them. The other spot is we love Abraham in the book of Hebrews. We kind of use him as a good kind of marker for how we have models of faith. But here, as we jump into Romans 4, Paul is coming off of righteousness happens only through Christ, and now we're applying that backwards to someone that everyone would be looking for as the way that we can prove that wrong. And Abraham is the best chance that we have to prove that wrong. walks through how it doesn't negate how God's working. Can I have someone read verses 1 through 6 of Romans 4?
What then shall we say about Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, discovered in this matter? If, in fact, Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now to the one who works, the wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. David says the same thing when he speaks of the blessedness of the one whom God credits, righteousness apart from works.
Thank you, Pat. So, what are we seeing as the part that we're adding when we look at Abraham and his faith? It's not just that Abraham has faith, but it's actually a transaction to him. And in order to follow Abraham's transaction of righteousness, Paul says this is very tied to, did he actually work for it, or is it gifted to him? And it's gifted. So that gift actually comes from the promise that he gets back in Genesis. So in Genesis 12, Abraham gets the particular promise that we're talking through. Let's turn to Genesis 12 and look at what Paul's referencing. So in Genesis 12, starting at verse 1, now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarai, Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. So not only is his promise making him a great nation, talking about the people, but also has a place, is specifically in Canaan. When we think of Abraham and his call, does he actually get to see that come true?
No.
He doesn't get it. In fact, it takes a couple generations to even get there. But before they get there, if you turn just a little bit further to Genesis 15, you see that he's already getting benefits because of this blessing, or because of this promise. Genesis 15:6 is this phrasing that Paul takes. And this is and you're going to have children as the stars and as the grains of sand, so shall your offspring be. And verse 6 says, and he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. And Paul's saying that this belief in the Lord being counted to him as righteousness, this is something that is not a natural but God comes in and he gifts in the righteousness because of that belief. And Abraham still doesn't have anything to show for it. He's still traveling. In fact, he doesn't even have an heir yet. We don't even have Isaac. His birth isn't promised until 2 chapters later. So Paul is using this part of Abram's life, or Abraham's life, all the way before the things we know. He's not yet Father Abraham, who had many sons. He's still Abram, who has a covenant with God and believes it. None of the signs that we know are true for him are actually present yet when things are credited to him as righteousness. So this is working in a way that there's no peace for Abraham to go along with and see that he's had the positive result from his covenant with God or from anything there, but he is being able to benefit from the belief. And so as we step back into Romans, Paul is using this to show how this belief is not needing other pieces to be true today in the present, because God's promises don't get barred by time like that. Which is where I'd like to jump into our study on page 31 of study 7 and look through universal and individual justification, because we're seeing how Abraham is walking this stuff out. So Romans certainly teaches the individual side of justification, repeatedly emphasizing faith, but Romans is also teaching universal justification in chapter 3. And as we come through 3, 4, and 5, Paul is showing the ways that God declares people righteous and what we need in order to be declared righteous. So on question 68 on page 31 there, we're looking in Romans 5 on what the patterns of universal and individual justification end up being. Can I have someone read Romans 5 verse 15 and then 18 and 19?
But the gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died by the trespass of one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? Nor can the gift of God be compared with the result of one man's sin. The judgment followed one sin and brought condemnation, but the gift followed many trespasses and brought justification. For it, by the trespass of one man, death reigned through that one man, how much more will those who receive God's abundant provision of grace and of the gift of righteousness reign in the life through the one man, Jesus Christ? Consequently, just as one trespass resulted in condemnation for all people, so also one righteous act resulted in justification and life for all people. For just as through the disobedience of the one man, the many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the one man, the many will be made righteous.
Thank you. So how do these verses show what the pattern of universal and individual justification is? This question 68 on your sheet.
Well, he emphasizes the many, many times in this paragraph, which I guess would imply that it's universal.
Yeah, so it is talking through the many is referring to universal justification. There is life How does it speak into individual justification? So for a specific person.
It talks about the results of one man's sin.
Yeah, and even back up to verse 15, the free gift is a gift that's received individually. So we've got universal justification, one for many by one person, but it's presented as a free gift individually to people. And again, if it's all one universally by one person, you're in the same boat as Abraham in regards to faith. That you're there as someone who's just receiving the gift, you're not in the active earning of that righteousness. Does it feel like you should be in the same boat as Abraham? Oh, maybe that's Noah.
I wouldn't want to be in his boat. Just to go off, that takes a tremendous amount of faith.
Okay.
Just to follow God and say, yeah, you told me to go and I'm going to go, I don't know where I'm going, don't know how long I'm going to be there, that takes a lot of faith.
It does. I don't think that puts us in a different camp from Abraham, though. We've got lots of ways to show how God's called us to something similar. Not to bring down the weight of what Abraham has, but to lift up what just living in a sinful world looks like. And just like Abraham, we don't have the results presented to us. We're back there in chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15 with Abraham. We're not with the book all completed and we know how it pans out. So we're in the same boat in that regard, that we're here in the middle. We've received the promise, but we haven't received the results of all of those promises yet. And yet there's still room for faith and room for the benefits of faith now before we get all those. What else sticks out as we talk through kind of the universal and individual justification? How that kind of presents?
Ask that again.
Anything else on like the universal justification being presented to everyone individually?
Well, I think in 20, it's interesting point that the law was brought in so that the trespass might increase. But where the sin increased, grace increased all the more. So that just as sin reigned in death, so also grace might reign through righteousness. So I thought that was interesting, that grace was increased.
Yeah. That's starting to sound like yesterday's epistle in chapter 7, where Paul says, every time I get set on doing something, I mess up, and that tells me that the law is good, and consequently that I'm not. But also that when you compare the law and you compare grace, grace is always winning. The grace, or if you substitute that with the promise, is always greater. So let's take that section, that the grace is greater than the law, and bring it back to those verses in 15 through 18. One person has the trespass, and everyone is now marred with original sin, because Adam sinned first. Everyone now has the effects of the trespass. And now one person comes and provides life. But how should we compare the two? We've got one person going out to everyone, sin has come into the world, and one person winning justification for everyone, winning grace. Well, verse 20 will help us say that the grace is still greater than all of what Adam felt. And I like that that's always kind of kept together when we talk about Jesus as the new Adam. This is a great way to kind of show that the one man has brought in sin, one man has fixed sin. And yet there's still a primacy to the fixing of sin. Yeah.
It's interesting that when God made Adam, Adam was perfect. And then through self-will, he became imperfect. And Christ remained perfect all the time.
Yeah, he completed where Adam failed. So this might be a good spot to jump back a page into chapter 4 as we talk through Abraham and why he's a good example. There's a couple different ways that we can talk about the big story of salvation, or what reading the Bible you can make out the big stories to be. One of them is following from the garden, and this would be our inclusion of Adam. And you come from the garden of the tree of life to the tree of the cross, and then you come back to the garden. And so this is one thread that we can follow, is that we started with the Garden of Eden, and we have the tree of life in it, and as a result of that tree, as a result of one tree, we had sin enter, and as the result of one tree and one man connected to that tree, we are able to see the recreation of the garden. It can happen again. There's also a way that you can read through. Hold on, gotta stop. You can see Jesus as the perfect Israel. And this is the one that matches up with Abraham. So where Israel wanders in the wilderness, and in the 40 years, they quickly show what imperfect faith looks like. Jesus comes through and he is picking up where Israel failed. Whereas in the purple, in the garden, he picks up where Adam fails. You can say Jesus comes through and he does what Israel fails to do. So where's a New Testament example that can show us where Jesus does what Israel fails to do?
Israel was supposed to be a blessing to everyone,
Okay.
but they didn't view it that way. Jesus directed his disciples to go to the Gentiles as well.
Yeah, I like that one. So the Israel as a light to the nations, and for the glory of the people of Israel, not actually to be an exclusive group, but to gather more people around God. The city on a hill is there so that you can join the city, because it's a safe place to be. What about the 40 years of wandering that Israel did? Early in Jesus' ministry, he's baptized and immediately sent out into the wilderness for a not insignificant 40 days of tempting.
Well, he didn't fall into worship the devil
Right.
like the Israelis.
And so you see, specifically, you can kind of pair those up and say, turn these stones to bread. Well, Israel was there at credited as righteousness. That is a image we can walk all the way through the Bible. And finally, the last kind of big thread that you can walk through is actually walking through the Exodus and having the sacrificial lamb, that sacrifice for sin. That can come through, and we see that again and again. We see John at the beginning of his gospel, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, the one sent out with all of it on him. And this is the same type of all of the many sins coming down into one. The Day of Atonement was a day to put all of your sin on one perfect lamb and send it out into the wilderness to die. And so we have these different threads that we can tell the gospel story with. And we see in Romans 4 that Abraham's hitting a couple different marks on each of these. So let's keep reading through, we got through verse 6, so can we have 7 through 9? Have someone read 7 through 9?
Before,
Yes, chapter 4, 7 through 9.
Blessed are they whose transgressions are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man whose sin the Lord will never count against him. Is his blessedness only for the circumcised or also for the uncircumcised? We have been saying that Abraham's faith was credited him as righteous. Under what circumstances was it credited? Was it after he was circumcised or before? It was not after, but before. And he received the signs of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised, so that he is the father of all who believe, but have not been circumcised, in order that righteousness might be credited to them. And he is also the father of the circumcised, who not only are circumcised, but who also walk in the footsteps of the faith that our father Abraham had before he was circumcised.
Thank you. So there's a lot of different threads pulling through here. Looking at our 4 different kind of master narratives to read through the Bible, show me where some of those are coming through in 9 through 12. What are some of the ways that it's returning to the garden? What are some ways it's Israel or a nation as one? What ways is it that courtroom scene, the atonement? What ways is it the Exodus or the passing over? What are some of the ways that that's coming through?
I don't know how it applies to that, but it's just interesting to me. The Jews are always talking about Abraham, and then they're also talking about you got to be circumcised. Well, Abraham wasn't circumcised when he was declared righteous.
Sure. Because he was declared righteous as he gets the covenant, not for any of the signs of the covenant. Yeah, it is interesting. They like the fully end of the story, Abraham.
Yeah, they don't make the connection there that you don't have to be circumcised.
Well, the Romans might have cared about it a little. Because you're preaching to a Gentile audience, and knowing which part of the story you can jump in on is important to them. And I think that's why Abraham's a really good example. Because you're right, he's taking that spot that they say very much in a Jewish community, that's going to be your most, the pinnacle of following the covenants is here with Abraham. And yet, the blessing, from verse 9, the blessing then is not only for the circumcised, but also for the uncircumcised, for we say that faith was counted to Abraham as righteousness. Circumcision is just a sign of faith. It's not a replacement for faith. So if we're saying this is faith counted to Abraham as righteousness, what master narrative are we fitting into? We're fitting into that atonement theory. We're here on crediting for righteousness. But then we get 11. He received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The purpose was to make him the father of all who believe. Now we're back to talking about leading Israel as a nation. The father, that spiritual father, he's there leading the people. And now we're getting a little more of Israel as one. What other spots come through as taking a particular thread of this and showing how Abraham is justified?
Pastor Rich asks easier questions.
Sorry about your luck.
Well, 13 kind of summarizes all of that, doesn't it? Moving on,
Yeah.
verse 13 kind of pulls it all together there, what he's trying to say.
Yeah, the promise to Abraham and his offspring being heirs of the world is not coming through law, but through righteousness of faith. So it's happening in a way that is not going to be dependent on what Abraham does to actually make those benefits happen. Abraham's not involved in presenting the benefits. It's not like he's working on this product, but he's believing in the faith which is in Christ is there as an active driver.
And grace is a big part of it.
Yeah, the opportunity to be presented with that faith, the grace there, is just as important for Abraham as it is for anyone on it. I'm gonna look at yeah.
I guess I never picked this up before until you just went through this, but in these verses, he's saying that Abraham, the Jews have always called Abraham, Father Abraham, but in these verses, it's being made very clear that Abraham is the father of the uncircumcised as well as the father of the circumcised.
Yeah, his call here is shown a little broader than we might normally place it.
Yeah, I've always just related Abraham to the father of the circumcised, the Jews.
Let's look at verses 7 and 8 in here. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man whom the Lord will not count his sin. This is Paul using Psalm 32 as he quotes it here. And what I like about him using this particular one is, blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven. So we have the restoration, forgiven, taking that lawless and recreating a wholeness. So now we're talking garden, cross, back to garden, and that type of theme. Whose sins are covered. Where is covering sins an important part?
Well, they're forgiven.
It is.
Really, they're forgiven, that, really counteracts the law.
That's a
Law
tone.
versus grace
It's a
and
tone.
forgiveness.
Yeah. Say more about forgiven and being covered. How they're similar or dissimilar. Are you saying like they're the same? They're the same?
It's the same thing,
Okay.
but it goes against what the laws, how the law is handled, how they live by the law. They're not
Yeah.
forgiven.
Yeah.
So, if they break the law, how is that, they're not given grace and allowed to repent, and God gives them, covers them and forgives them, their sins are covered. I don't know what they do when they break the law. What happens to Jews when they break the law?
Well, there's still the idea of knowing what to do with laws that we break, actual sin versus original sin. And here we're seeing the psalmist is writing on lawless deeds, or that sin is forgiven, which is that continuing the relationship, making whole again. And then the Hebrew poetry is there to give you parallel, something to state it again in a different way, and whose sins are covered. But what's different about the sins being covered is that is language that brings us back to the Exodus. Or more specifically than the Exodus, the Passover. Because you were to put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost so that the angel could pass over, because you were covered by that blood. It's not a restoration, it's a passing over. So here we get both of those threads right in line. And then we follow up with another thread. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. And now we're up in atonement theory, the courtroom scene. So we're seeing Paul weave through all of these different images, summarizing not just Abraham, but all of the major ways that we can read through from the Old Testament into the New. Right here on Abraham and all of these ways that it's Israel moving together, it's the garden seeking restoration, it's sin needing to be reckoned with and atoned for, it's the passing over of the Lord. These are all wound in really tightly for Abraham. And he's kind of the banner guy bringing it all into the discussion.
Is it kind of like 7 is about the Jews and the law and them, the houses being covered and all that, where 8 is more like talking about Christ, atoning for our sins and forgiving. It's almost like contradictory to me.
Yeah.
Those two together, it seems.
So a lot of the style of the Psalm poetry is there to retell the same image over and over. Their style of parallel is not as commonly on the contrasting parallel that we see a lot more of. A lot of times they're built to say the grass is green, green is the grass, green grass is good. That kind of, you're building the same image, but you're taking slightly different tweaks at it. I don't think it's there trying to split out who that applies to. And Paul's going to keep going and say Abraham is the father of the circumcised and the uncircumcised, and we're not taking different paths to get there ends up starting with these, blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. And that section that Paul's quoting is followed up with, for when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all the day long. So they're building up that set to go against, and when I don't tell the Lord about my sin, it can't get forgiven, it can't get covered. There is no chance for this reckoning so that things aren't counted against me. So yeah, I don't see that going and applying separately, but just restating the same idea. But we have these different ways to restate the idea. And they can pull up different images or thoughts in each of us. And that's where you'll hear different things come through. So Abraham's called in Genesis. He's used again here in Romans. We also like him in Hebrews. We don't use him a lot of other places as a proof text or anything. But when we use Abraham, he's often used as this figurehead for Israel. And Israel, in its best understanding here, is God's chosen people. The people that he has gathered alongside himself, has given the promise and attached it to. So when we look at Abraham specifically, let's go back in time to where he's at and us today. There are some differences in what our worship looks like and what being faithful looks like. But it's still the same promise that it's trusting in. So in Abraham's time, he's believing on the promise. What is the content of that promise that he's believing in? Just in a nutshell. What if you said what's Abraham believe in that's having him credited here as righteousness? What would that be?
He'll be the father of mighty nation.
Mm-hmm. Yep, God's promised him that you are going to be the father of a nation. You're going to have as many heirs as there are stars in the sky. But how?
Sarah has an idea.
Well, that's not the first idea, actually.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Well, it says in 13, through the righteousness that comes by faith, talking about Abraham and his offspring, that he would be heir to the Lord, but through the righteousness that comes by his faith.
Yeah, and faith is always going to have an object. So the faith that Abraham has to be placed in something. And when it's placed in God's care for us, we see that can result in the promise and the leading a mighty nation, having the descendants, being a light both to Israel and to, as Paul says, the uncircumcised. But more than that, it's not going to do much good for Abraham without the cross. Abraham's belief is the same belief in the promise that's given in Genesis 3. That the serpent's head will be crushed and the seed of Eve will bear fruit. And that's continued through Abraham's promise. What's the faith that we have? What does that promise look like for us today? Is it any different than Abraham's?
Yeah, the gospel
Abraham didn't have the gospel, we have the gospel.
He didn't have the gospel text.
You sound very Lutheran, Martha.
Well,
We have the gospel.
Jesus hadn't lived yet, so
And he had the law.
it was the promise of it. But
Yeah.
we have the actuality
Right, they just had the
of
Old Testament,
Jesus' life.
right, the
Uh-huh.
predictions referring to Christ coming in the writings and stuff. Could you address 15?
I'd love to get through 14, which I think Martha teed us up to. Once we're through 14, we'll get right to 15. Martha, can I put you on the spot and have you read verse 14 since you teed it up so well?
I'd be delighted.
Thank you.
For if those who live by law are heirs, faith has no value and the promise is worthless. How about that?
So if you don't have the gospel, doesn't really matter what you're doing with the law. How well you are, whether you are the circumcised or the uncircumcised. Because faith needs the promise. Okay? So for Abraham, that promise of Jesus coming and dying on the cross, if we had our little timeline, we'd have Abraham, and then we'd have a cross, and then we'd have us kind of after it. So are we after the promise? If Abraham was here before the cross, he could look forward. We say, yep, that's a promise, not yet happened. And if we're standing over here on this side, we have the gospel. Do we still have a promise?
We have two crosses in this room.
Saying that we're not after the cross?
So I'd say we're after the cross.
Okay.
That's what I'd say.
But if we're after the cross, and if that's the promise that that Abraham had, if Abraham was waiting on the cross, we're no longer waiting on the cross. So our faith differs only in that we would change one word. Abraham was waiting on the cross, and we have the promise because of the cross. But it's the same promise.
But we're still waiting
What are we waiting for?
to die and join Jesus in heaven.
Mm-hmm. And this is why I love so many of these different colored theories that I've got up on the board. That the garden places the cross in the middle. It's not the end of the story. Israel is kind of a perpetual, a nation being led and gathered around. Yeah, the atonement theory, that one kind of gets, settled and closed. But the Exodus, the passing over, is really at the start of Israel's journey. So there's no shortage of things that we have the promise in, but it's the same promise that Abraham had. Okay.
Pastor, could you clarify again what is the promise?
So the promise that God gives us that works through faith. So when you have faith in something, you're trusting that God will do X, Y, and Z. Abraham's faith is there as he's waiting on one of those details to be the cross. We have the promise and we have the proof of it that the cross has already happened. But I'm trying to write in that there's more than just the cross for that promise. So being the father of many nations, Israel being a light unto others, we'd say that that's not fully been done yet by God. And so the promise is that God will complete that work and that path that he's on. We just have a couple extra pieces along the way that have been fulfilled that give us something to trust in alongside those promises that God gives us. Abraham he can look back further to see what God had already done. We do the same thing. We look back and here, Paul is kind of doing this in a shorthand and very compact way to the Romans, saying, okay, so here's Abraham. He was making this move. He had faith because God had promised him this. And faith results in righteousness and sin being covered, being counted favorably. This is the same motion we're going to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Abraham had one other thing to look at, which was not losing Isaac. And so God provides, instead of having to kill his son, God provides the sacrifice, the lamb. And very similar to what he does with Jesus.
Yeah. You see that idea of atonement theory very directly in Abraham and Isaac as the sacrifice, the making right is presented directly in front of them. It's presented at exactly the right time. It's presented without any shortcuts that make it easier. But also, you see that Abraham and Isaac were able to experience this moment kind of after the sacrifice, which I think is a good parallel for where we kind of lay on that timeline too. I think that's a really good way to show it. You know, our liturgy ends up doing that in the season of Lent. One of the prayers around communion has a part that will switch out based on the season. And for the season of Lent, it picks up the Abraham and Isaac motif and shows that as a preface to Jesus coming to the cross and makes that a clear connection. Other times in the year, they talk about John the Baptist showing the way. They show, Epiphany season, you're talking about that light. But in the season of Lent, they really pick up Abraham and Isaac as an image that is there to point you to what the cross is going to do and what it's going to look like. Yeah. Let's make it to verse 15. Let's get there. For the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. And let's skip into 16 just so we complete the thought. That is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring, not only to the adherent of the law, but also to the one who shares the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all.
So is he talking about the wrath of God on the Jews? Is that what that means? He brings wrath? Because the law brings wrath. Does that mean only living by the law brings wrath from God?
The law won't save.
Right.
The law won't be able to give you a promise. In those uses of the law, it's going to be a way to show your shortcomings, not to show how good you've done. So yeah, in that way, to live completely by the law would be to be like, is it Sisyphus that keeps pushing the rock up the hill forever? That's your relationship living with the law, is you're constantly there measuring, and the second that you're short, you're sliding back down. Yeah, so the law is not there to help give you any of these promises, which we've heard a lot through on Romans 3, on the law being there and applying to all. But the law is simply there to show that sin needs fixed. one man caused all of sin, and one man caused a fix for sin. And when we compare the two of them, grace is greater. Each and every time. And that's where 16 really picks that up. The promise rests on grace and is now guaranteed to all the offspring. Now we're talking about something that moves forward in time. We have a guarantee because there's grace, there's faith, we have a promise. And it's not based on how well you're adhering to the law, but the one who shares the faith of Abraham. Now, you had kind of looked at other spots that may be peeling out where Israel and the Gentiles might be shown differently in the text. 16 is probably a good spot, not only to the adherent of the law, not only to those who are following Abraham because they learned of him from the law, but those who know Abraham because of his faith, which is how Paul's introducing Abraham to the Romans here. Your interaction, how you meet Abraham doesn't matter. We're going to say yes, either way, you're there on the promise. And the law is always there to push you to the promise. The law showing you your sin is not to show you your sin for sin's sake, but it's God's work that pushes you to meet the gospel. Anything else on 15, 16? Any questions that you would go super easy on Pastor Rich for that you might come on my way? Well, we'll read through these prayer requests and we'll finish up our time today right at the end of our hour. Next week, I'm still here with you. And then the week after that, I'll flip to Pastor Sam as we keep going here through the summer. So on our prayer requests today, we have the family of Pat Clark, we have Bob Yorkham, Pastor Fink, Daryl and Paula Fiesel, the family of Suzanne Pointer at the death of her mother at 102, those with dementia and their caregivers, might rejoice in the promises that you give us. That we, like Abraham, might be led by your Spirit and called into places that we might not know all the answers to. And that we might trust in those same promises, knowing that you work all things out for our good. Be with us today as we lift up these requests that are on our hearts and minds of those gathered here, especially as we mourn with those who are near to you, especially alongside the friends and family of Pat Clark and of Francis. We ask that you be with and heal those who are in need, especially Bob Bjorkman, Pastor Fink, Daryl, Paula. We ask that you be with those who are seeing care as a need, be with both those with dementia and with their caregivers, that they might be strengthened and renewed according to your mercy. We give thanks for those blessings that you give us, whether we see them or whether they go unnoticed today, Lord. But especially we want to notice and lift up Kristen as she starts her work here at Trinity in our preschool, that you would continue to bless her time and her effort and all the different efforts here at this place, that we might share your gospel and your word with those who desperately need to hear it. Be with us each and every day as we rejoice in your mercies, which are new every morning, and as we follow in your footsteps, praying as you taught us. Our Father,